Now, yesterday we got the Nielsen viewership numbers for the final week of Andor Season 2, or the week that the last story arc or final 3 episodes dropped. And very quickly before getting to it, I know there are going to be some people out there who immediately say in the comments below, who cares, I like the show, and that's all that matters to me. And that is perfectly fine if that's how you feel and you don't really care about the numbers one way or the other. But if you did enjoy Andor and would maybe like to see something like it again from Star Wars at some point in the future, or if maybe you hated it and never want to see anything like it again, the viewership numbers should be at least somewhat interesting to you, because those numbers will no doubt play a role in dictating what Disney will or won't do in the future with the franchise. In other words, if those numbers are good, we may get something like Andor again someday, and if they're not, well, we almost certainly never will, because there's no money in it for them. If people aren't subscribing or staying subscribed for something like Andor, which did cost Disney around $645 million, and that is for both seasons, well, then they'll see no reason in ever doing something like that again and spending that kind of money. And so, getting to the numbers then, getting to the top 10 from Nielsen for the week of May 12th through the 18th, again, this is when the final 3 episodes dropped, we'll see it was actually the number 1 show overall, and not just the number 1 original show, but the most viewed show anywhere or of any show on any streaming service for that week, getting 931 million minutes of watch time. Which, yeah, is impressive. Winning the week is extremely impressive and is certainly a big, big win for the show or a potential future show like it. Not to mention the numbers do keep going up week in and week out. Things are trending in the right direction for Andor Season 2, and that's a reason to celebrate if you like the show. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see the numbers next week, to see if it is still in the top 10 the week after the finale when a lot of shows tend to drop out. And if people are still coming to the show or finishing it up, and more on that in a bit. Either way, no matter how someone might want to spin it or how they might want to look at it, this is a win, this is impressive, this is good news for the show, no doubt. But is it really that impressive? And to begin to figure that out, we will have to dig a bit deeper into the numbers. And do keep in mind, I'm going to be as objective as possible here, despite, yes, the fact, as many of you no doubt know, I loved Andor Season 2 as I loved Season 1, and I would very much like to just sit here and say this is the greatest news ever and Andor has won everything and Star Wars is saved by it. I would love to tell you to buckle up and expect more like Andor in the future from Disney because they see it as a win, but is that the case? Does Disney actually see it as a win? Because if they don't, there's no point in me blowing smoke up your ass and telling you that they do. All that said, usually the first thing we do to try to figure out how well the show did, especially in the eyes of Disney, is to compare it to the other Star Wars live-action shows, to compare the numbers and see where it ranks against them, which we can still do here, but it's not going to be easy to directly compare them, given, as you know, Andor Season 2 dropped 3 episodes at a time for 4 straight weeks, adding up to 12 episodes overall for the season. Not to mention, not that I'd imagine it's adding a ton of watch time or anything, but this number, this 931 million number, does include how much people watched Season 1 as well during this time period. It is a combination of both seasons, all episodes. Either way, the sort of issue here is that all other previous live-action Star Wars shows on Disney Plus have had only 1 episode per week drop, other than a few of them that maybe had a 2 or 3 episode premiere week. In other words, other shows had more of a drip feed, whereas this one, or the second season of Andor, was dropping some pretty big chunks each and every week. And keeping in mind episodes from this season were around 45 to 50 minutes long, which already tends to be rather long for Star Wars shows that tend to average more about 35 minutes, and that we're again getting 3 of them each week, that then means we're getting over 2 hours worth of new Star Wars content to watch each week instead of, again, maybe that 35 to 40 minutes other shows tend to be, or their episodes tend to be. This then potentially means for the more casual fan or the average viewer, it may be harder to keep up. Not everyone watches the 3 episodes back to back to back the day they drop. Some people are going to still just watch 1 per week, no matter how many are out there. Or maybe they'll watch 2, but either way, they're going to start to fall behind, which is another reason why next week's numbers will be rather interesting and could, I would guess, still be pretty high. I'm sure there's a lot of people who did not finish the season in the week the final episodes dropped. Another thing to keep in mind here is that a lot of people play the frequent subscribe unsubscribe game with streaming services these days, especially with just how many there are, where they will wait until, say, every episode of a new season of a show they want to watch drops, and then they will subscribe for a month, they will binge it all, and then they will unsubscribe again. And certainly that is happening here to some extent. I have read plenty of comments, and I know it's anecdotal, but I've read plenty of comments from people saying they're just going to subscribe for 1 month when the whole series or whole season is out there, and then they're gonna cancel again. But anyway, this then could, to some extent, and for better or worse, it could explain the jump in numbers a bit, that there's a lot of people who, now that the season is over, they are subscribing and they are beginning to watch it all. Nevertheless, what is interesting about this, or what could be, is if Disney is seeing a spike in subscribers as soon as all of the episodes of Andor Season 2 are available, and if those new subscribers are then mostly watching Andor, which you would figure they are, and then they are unsubscribing once they watch them all, keeping in mind they, of course, Disney Plus I mean, they have access to all of the numbers, they know exactly who is doing what and watching what on their streaming platform. But if that is what they're seeing, a ton of people signing up just to watch Andor Season 2, more so than with previous Star Wars shows, that will certainly be a good sign for the show. That will tell them that people are interested in Andor, but they're not interested in any of the other stuff they're offering. However, despite that all arguably being very good news, if we do try and sort of directly compare Andor to how all the other shows or Star Wars shows on Disney Plus have done, if we do try to measure views or just how many people are actually watching it, and again, we can't do a perfect comparison here for many reasons, but if we look at how the viewership for the final episodes of this season did against all the other Disney Plus Star Wars shows that we have information for anyway, and to calculate views, what we have to do is take the number of watch time in a particular week, and then we divide it by the length of the episode or episodes from that particular week. And we then get a very, very rough approximation of how that final episode did, or how many people actually watched it. Sort of, anyway. Again, this isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and with Andor Season 2 doing something very different with how it was released, this isn't the greatest way to compare them, but I do think it is interesting to see how they stack up. And so when we do our calculations here, if we take that 931 million minutes viewed for the final week of Andor Season 2, and then divide it by 145, which is the total runtime of all 3 episodes that dropped that week, we get a grand total of 6.4 million views, or again, very roughly, we can guess that about 6.4 million people watched those episodes that final week. As for how that compares to all the other shows that we can or have done the same thing for, well, honestly, it's not fantastic. It's better than Andor Season 1, as well as better than The Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, but it is less than all the others, and in some cases, it's much, much less. Especially when comparing it to 2 of the seasons of The Mandalorian. The ones we have, the 2nd and 3rd season, we never got Nielsen numbers for Season 1. Both of those basically got 3 times the views that Andor Season 2 did. However, if we just look at raw minutes watched, Andor Season 2 isn't all that far behind them. Though again, you can make the argument there is a heck of a lot more of Andor to watch, or that this final week of episodes was over 2 hours long, whereas the finales for Mando Season 2 and 3 were less than an hour. Though yes, you can then make the argument, as I was before, that not everybody sits down and watches all of it in 1 week, so it's hard to really know what these numbers say exactly. In some ways, it's right up there with Mando Season 2 and 3, and above everything else, but in other ways, it's towards the mid or even bottom of the pack. Either way here, with just how bad the previous 2 shows did, those being Skeleton Crew, which never cracked the Nielsen top 10 ratings, and The Acolyte, which only managed to do that twice, Disney at the very least could look at this and see an uptick in the numbers from those previous shows, and an increasing uptick it seems, and see that as this show as Andor Season 2 bringing some interest back to the franchise that was maybe killed by the previous 2 shows, or maybe even as an indicator that people prefer this type of Star Wars over those other 2 shows, and I do say that as someone who really enjoyed Skeleton Crew, don't get me wrong here, and I hope that some people who are coming back to watch Andor Season 2 or resubbing to Disney Plus for it, that they will at least give Skeleton Crew a chance. No, it's not Andor or anything like that, but it is entertaining, and I do think it is some pretty good Star Wars. And so, what is the conclusion here? What's the takeaway? Well, it's hard to say. I think there's definitely a lot of good and maybe a little bit of bad as well. Again, it did better than the last two shows, for sure, and it did better than the first season of Andor, but it certainly seems like other shows overall tended to do a bit better. Though, again, when you just look at the raw numbers, people are watching a lot of Andor. It does stack up with pretty much all the other shows, except for maybe Mando Season 2. That one did really, really well. Either way, I certainly don't know that we can look at these numbers and say that it set the world on fire and somehow Star Wars is saved and Disney clearly knows exactly the way forward because, again, it's such an overwhelming demand for the show and it made tons and tons of money for them. Which, again, is really the only number that matters to them. How much money did it make them? And it all depends, I guess, on how Disney sees this. Do they, again, see the numbers going up from other shows? Do they look at the raw numbers and say, this is a win? This is a positive and we should explore more like this in the future? Or do they look at those older shows, see how well they did in comparison, and say, Andor isn't the way forward because it can't exactly get to those numbers? Again, it's hard to say, but my guess and hope is that Disney will look at these numbers as pretty much a positive, and then we'll look beyond the numbers and see how fans reacted to it. That many of us are praising it for its quality, and they'll understand quality is the way forward, which they should have figured out from the start. They'll figure out that no, they don't have to spend $645 million on the next show. They just need to, no matter the budget, they need to find talented people that can make a good show happen. And so I certainly do hope we get more like Andor going forward. And I don't just mean its tone or style or its more adult and gritty nature, but rather I simply mean something that is well written. That if you don't have solid scripts to work with, if you don't have talented people who care and know what they're doing, you can spend twice as much as was spent on Andor and end up with less than half the results. Well, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me what you think of these numbers. Do you see this as a big positive, a big win, or maybe not? Maybe you see it somewhere in between or as a loss. Or maybe you see it as a loss because you think it is a big win for the show and you don't like Andor and don't want more of it. Whatever the case may be, though, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.